Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squad for boxing news and views from around the internet. Derek Chisora vs Joseph Parker this weekend. For me, this is quite the crossroads fight, in particular for Joseph Parker. So we'll start with Parker first and then on to Chisora and some thoughts, and then to the fight proper in terms of how I think the fight's going to play out, because I think most of us have an idea about where it's going to go. It's just whether Chisora can keep up with Parker, who'll be boxing, and will he be able to nick some of those mid-rounds. But in terms of Parker, it really is a sort of make or break type crossroads fight, because effectively for 3 years he hasn't really been up to much. Since losses to Anthony Joshua, Dillian White, there was a myriad of tune-ups, and then more recently he's had a slightly harder fight in Junior Fa. That was a domestic clash in New Zealand. But the last meaningful win that he had was in 2017. So Joseph Parker really has not been sort of up to much in terms of the win column in recent years, apart from mostly tune-ups. And he needs a good win. He needs to look good. He needs to have an exciting performance for all sorts of different reasons. I mean, I expect he will start fast. He'll look slick for a few rounds, but there is always the possibility with Parker, with his gas tank, that he starts to slow down, goes into a bit of a hibernation mode through the mid-rounds, and then goes on to grind out a decision. But it feels like in recent years, after the early promise, the early sort of sparkle that Parker showed, knocking guys out on the way up, that there just really hasn't been any razzmatazz. And for quite some considerable time, people were saying that they thought that Parker had topped out with his trainer, former trainer now, Kevin Barry. And then just recently, almost out of nowhere, he drops Kevin Barry, he signs on with Andy Lee, and he has been training in the UK with Lee for this fight for the past 6 weeks or so. He was out in Morecambe, he was training with Tyson Fury for a time, and he's also had guys like Kamil Sokolowski acting as a sparring partner, and also Alexander Marovich. How much those last two names, Sokolowski and Marovich, mirror or mimic Derek Chisora as a sparring partner in that sort of setting, I do question a little bit. But as we know with Sokolowski in particular, very honest game journeyman who can give you some tough rounds, some good sparring. So yeah, maybe it's not quite like for like, but he will have gotten something from sparring these guys, and obviously working with Tyson Fury and Andy Lee there in Morecambe. But with Lee, I mean, I think we can only expect so much from one training camp. So I think people need to keep expectations in check, because he had 8 years with Kevin Barry. He's had 6 weeks with Andy Lee. I don't expect anything drastically to change or to be different from Parker in this fight. Maybe we'll notice a few things. Maybe some of the punch technique might be a little bit better, but don't expect him to be some sort of overhauled fighter. I think if things get tough, or, Parker will just revert to type. He'll do what he's used to and has done in previous fights. In terms of Derek Chisora, he's actually listed as the A side for this fight, and that's rather remarkable given it's the year 2021, considering the length of his career. He's also coming off a loss. He has 10 losses, and the fact that there's not much on the line here. But it is another opportunity for Chisora to try scalp another name many have above him. And let's face it, even if he loses, he's kind of like a cockroach in some regards. If he puts in a good shift, there's going to be more good gatekeeper level fights out there for him, which means decent money. Because when you think about it, there's no one really sort of occupying that space that to be a really good B-side apart from Derek Chisora. I think Carlos Takam to some extent, but Chisora seems to have cornered that market to be that guy who is going to talk a little trash in the run-up. He's going to give it a good effort. It'll be a relatively tough and competitive fight, but ultimately he's going to get beaten. I mean, eventually his big money paydays, they're going to dry up at some point, but I think he still, even if he loses this one, might be able to eke out a few more. especially given most in the division won't entertain being the B-side, which Chisora has done and will do if the money is right. And actually, when you consider the betting odds, they have certainly been shorter than they were a couple of years ago. So people do believe that Derek Chisora has a chance in this fight, that he's more than just a live dog. And a lot of people do believe that he can beat Joseph Parker. And when you consider Parker really hasn't been up to much in recent years, I can see why some people are looking at Chisora going, well, his performances haven't been bad. Parker just really hasn't been doing much. And some people believe that Derek Chisora can knock out Joseph Parker. I don't see that happening. I think this is more sort of a, going to points sort of situation. And let me be clear as well. I mean, Chisora, he's good at what he does. He's cornered that market, as I say, but don't buy into the rhetoric that he's now some sort of changed man and better than ever. He is what he is. Because if that were the case, that he's all some overhauled fighter, he would have beaten Alexander Usyk. Usyk is a guy, a former cruiserweight, who a lot of people have said was too small for the division. But ultimately, he outpointed Derek Chisora. Sure, a few tough rounds and a bit awkward at times, but he got the job done. But make no mistake, Derek Chisora is a good fighter. He's just not quite world level. But if you're not good enough, you're not going to beat him. And let's face it, Parker, he honestly needs to show us that he is above Derek Chisora, because at this point, I mean, who really knows where he's at? He's got a couple of sort of dodgy elbows, which he's had operated on in the past 4 or 5 years. He hasn't really been fighting anyone of note. So this is a crossroads fight, and they actually do seemingly like this fight for Joseph Parker. They like the style matchup clearly, and they believe this is that sort of stepping stone fight for Joseph Parker onto something bigger and better. But could it end up being a banana skin? And let's face it, if Parker wins but he stinks the place out with a decision, and there's more holding than punching in the second half of the fight or something like that, it probably isn't going to do too much for a stock, and probably keeps him in that sort of who needs him camp. And I think he has been in that camp in recent years, but I don't think they've really been that ambitious with his career, seemingly trying to eke him to a title shot. But if he doesn't look good, doesn't sparkle, probably doesn't help with his next contract, remembering this is his last fight on his Matchroom deal. And there could be an extension, and probably will be, but I don't think he's going to get the same sort of contract guarantee that he got for this deal, 3-fight deal. Remembering for the first 2 fights on that deal, he was getting, for Shaundale Winters and Alex Leopai, $1 million paydays, facing journeyman. Nice work if you can get it. But overall, I think his advisor and former promoter, David Higgins, he's probably not going to worry so much about the style points from whatever sort of performance Parker puts in, because he just wants Parker to keep winning. He wants to keep him high in sanctioning bodies and position Parker for a second tilt at a world title. So if there is a good performance in there, it's all the better and it's a bonus on top, but winning is the most important goal, because they want him to get that second title shot, which, let's face it, at this point, only is going to come if he's a mandatory, or if the belts fragment at some point in the next year or two, say after an undisputed fight happens. And this is a fight, like I say, with Chisora, they've wanted for some time. They clearly like the matchup and believe that Parker has the style and enough to get by Derek Chisora. But with them, and the way that they've guided Parker's career, it's always been about, the risk and reward. Enough risk, but clearly having enough reward to make the risk worthwhile. And I think this falls into that sort of fight. But ultimately, is this going to be a case where maybe they're overlooking Chisora? Hard to say. I mean, I think probably Parker is going to win on points, and that's my prediction. For all the talk of Parker working with Andy Lee, trying to develop some more power with that Kronk style that Lee is synonymous with, I mean, we have to take Parker as we've seen him, I believe, which is he's a decent boxer, he can move well, but he doesn't have world level power. He's never stopped anyone at world level. But then again, is Derek Chisora at world level? I think he's close to world level, but maybe not quite there. But even at that sort of level, Parker really hasn't knocked anyone like Chisora out. And think back, if you don't believe me, who has he knocked out at world level? He hasn't. So for me, this has decision written all over it. And I think what we're going to see is Chisora is going to come out strong. He'll be winging shots. He'll be aggressive. He will probably take note of that Dillian Whyte fight from 2018. Parker didn't like being roughed up, didn't like the aggression and the sort of manhandling that Dillian Whyte was doing to him. So I think Chisora will be doing everything he can to make Joseph Parker uncomfortable. He'll be coming forward, applying pressure, winging shots, and we're going to see Parker probably for most of the early rounds, if not most of the fight, moving and probably on the back foot, pot-shotting, looking to walk Chisora onto a right hand. He sort of famously, had this jab right hand, which he just sort of, it becomes this thing that he does over and over, and it doesn't really seem to be that effective. So hopefully, at least Andy Lee can sort of sort that out. I think he does need more variation, because ultimately, if he just throws the same sort of patterns and, shots, then Chisora is going to be ready and waiting for those, know what's going to be coming. I mean, he does actually need to sort of shake up his game plan a little bit. But I think the first 6 rounds will be pretty competitive. I think there will probably, the early ones, a couple to Parker, maybe a couple to Chisora in terms of back and forth. It could be that while Chisora is fresh, he's going to be at his most dangerous. He's landing more shots. Even if they're not completely clean, he could be landing to the body. And I do think he's really going to be throwing the kitchen sink. But it's through those mid rounds where this fight will be won by either guy. I think because Parker does slow down, he tends to just sort of circle, throw jabs in the odd right hand. Those are where in some fights he has actually lost fights, does lose some of those sort of mid to late rounds, and then he sort of finishes stronger. So I think we will see something like that again, but he's just got to bank enough rounds to get the decision. And this could end up being some sort of 7-5, 8-4 type of fight. Maybe similar to the Usyk one, where one guy's won it and there is probably 2 or 3 rounds in it, but it was a close, competitive, good fight. Is it a pay-per-view fight? I know some people are a little bit sort of upset that this is on pay-per-view, because is this a pay-per-view main event? Yeah, I'm a little on the fence about that myself. And the card itself, there's a lot of names on there, but not necessarily the best fights. And I know some people get upset when you say, is this really a pay-per-view worthy card? Because some people absolutely hate it, but some people absolutely love it and think value is being delivered. For me, paying $40, I'm not sure the value is quite there, but if you're paying DAZN prices, say $3 or $4 somewhere in the world, well, you probably think it is. But anyway, what do you make of this fight? Who do you think's going to win? Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.